Ryan Martinez believed that healing hands never forgot their purpose, even when life forced them to hold a mop instead of helping patients walk again. But when the billionaire's paralyzed mother gave up all hope of ever moving again, could his hidden past as a physical therapist change everything? And what price would this forbidden act of compassion cost him in the gleaming towers of corporate America? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The alarm clock's piercing shriek cut through the pre-dawn darkness of Ryan's cramped studio apartment in East Brooklyn at exactly 4:15 a.m., the same time it had sounded every weekday for the past 2 years. His calloused hands, once praised by doctors for their intuitive understanding of human anatomy, now reached automatically for the snooze button, a ritual that had become as mechanical as everything else in his carefully contained existence. The framed physical therapy license hanging crookedly on his bedroom wall caught the dim light from his phone screen, a constant reminder of the life he'd lost when the medical malpractice lawsuit had destroyed his career. Dr. Sarah Williams, his former supervisor, had warned him that one patient's false accusations could end everything he'd worked for, but Ryan had never imagined how completely the medical establishment would abandon him. The license was expired now, worthless as wallpaper, but he couldn't bring himself to throw it away. In the adjoining kitchenette, Ryan prepared his usual breakfast of instant coffee and day-old bread, his movements efficient despite the fatigue that seemed permanently etched into his 34-year-old frame. The medical bills from his younger sister Carmen's cancer treatment were stacked neatly on his small dining table, a mountain of financial obligation that grew higher each month despite his careful budgeting. Carmen had beaten the disease, but the cost had consumed their family's savings and forced Ryan to take any job he could find. The subway ride from Brooklyn to Manhattan's financial district gave him 47 minutes to read, a luxury he'd discovered when he realized that most early morning commuters were too exhausted to bother with conversation. Today, he carried a worn textbook on advanced rehabilitation techniques, borrowed from the public library and already renewed twice. The knowledge felt rusty now, like a language he'd once spoken fluently but hadn't practiced in years. But reading helped him remember who he used to be beneath the janitor's uniform. Meridian Financial Tower rose 68 stories into the Manhattan sky, a monument to wealth and power that made Ryan feel simultaneously invisible and exposed every time he approached its gleaming facade. He entered through the service entrance on Park Avenue, badging in with the security card that granted him access to a world of luxury he cleaned but could never afford to inhabit. The building's residents arrived each morning in private cars and executive town cars, their designer shoes clicking against marble floors that Ryan had polished to perfection just hours before. They spoke in the rapid-fire shorthand of high finance, their conversations peppered with numbers that represented more money than Ryan's entire extended family would see in several lifetimes. He was functionally invisible to most of them, which had initially stung, but now felt like a form of protection. Invisibility meant he could observe without being observed, understand without being understood, care without being noticed. But 57 floors above the bustling street level, behind reinforced windows that filtered the morning light into something soft and expensive, another kind of struggle was unfolding in the penthouse suite that served as both corporate headquarters and private residence for one of Manhattan's most powerful families. Victoria Jackson had built her financial empire from nothing, transforming a small investment firm inherited from her late husband into a multinational corporation worth billions. At 62, she commanded respect in boardrooms from New York to Tokyo, her sharp intellect and ruthless business instincts legendary among her peers. But all her wealth and influence had proven helpless against the spinal cord injury that had confined her mother, Margarita Jackson, to a wheelchair for the past 18 months. The penthouse apartment was a masterpiece of accessible design, every detail carefully planned to accommodate Margarita's paralysis while maintaining the elegance that Victoria's position demanded. Doorways had been widened, bathrooms redesigned with grab bars that looked more like sculpture than medical equipment, and elevators installed to connect the multi-level residents. The best money could buy, Victoria often thought bitterly, which had turned out to be nowhere near good enough. Margarita Jackson, once a vibrant woman who had raised Victoria as a single mother while working 3 jobs, now spent her days staring out at the Hudson River through floor-to-ceiling windows that framed a view worth millions. The accident had been absurdly random, a slip on wet marble steps outside Lincoln Center after attending the opera, her one monthly indulgence. The fall had compressed her T12 vertebra, leaving her paralyzed from the waist down, and stealing not just her mobility, but her fierce independence. In the 18 months since the accident, Victoria had hired the best physical therapists money could buy. Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell from Mount Sinai, Dr. James Rodriguez from NYU Langone, even flying in specialists from Switzerland and Germany. They had been professional, knowledgeable, and ultimately powerless to restore what Margarita had lost. More devastating than the physical limitations was watching her mother's spirit fade. The woman who had once juggled multiple jobs while raising a daughter, now unable to find purpose in a life that felt borrowed rather than lived. The morning routine in the penthouse had contracted to its essentials. Assistance with bathing and dressing provided by a rotating team of private nurses. Breakfast prepared by hands that shook slightly from medication side effects. And long hours spent positioned by windows where Margarita could watch a world she no longer felt part of. The physical therapy sessions had ended 3 months ago when Margarita had finally refused to participate, telling Victoria through tears that continuing the exercises felt like torturing herself with false hope. "The doctors all say the same thing," Margarita had whispered during one of their increasingly rare conversations. "Complete spinal cord injury, permanent paralysis, no hope of recovery. Why should I keep pretending that moving my arms and shoulders will somehow bring back my legs?" Victoria had tried everything she could think of: experimental treatments, alternative therapies, even consulting with faith healers despite her own skepticism. Money, she had learned, could buy access to the best medical care in the world, but it couldn't purchase miracles. Her mother was disappearing day by day, not from physical decline, but from the soul-crushing weight of hopelessness. The irony wasn't lost on Victoria that the woman who had built her career on solving impossible problems, who had navigated corporate takeovers and international financial crises with legendary determination, felt completely helpless in the face of her mother's despair. All her resources, all her connections, all her influence couldn't restore Margarita's belief that life still held possibilities worth pursuing. 57 floors below, Ryan Martinez was beginning his shift in a world that couldn't have felt more distant from the penthouse suite struggles. But fate has a way of connecting lives across the most unlikely circumstances. In his janitor's cart, hidden beneath cleaning supplies and maintenance schedules, Ryan carried tools that no one knew he possessed. Hands trained in the precise art of rehabilitation. Knowledge gained through years of helping people reclaim their bodies after devastating injuries. And most importantly, a heart that still believed in the possibility of healing even when hope seemed lost. The collision of their worlds was only hours away, set in motion by forces none of them could predict or control. But sometimes the most profound changes begin with the smallest acts of human kindness, performed by people who have nothing left to lose and everything to give. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The elevator malfunction happened at exactly 2:47 p.m. on a gray Tuesday afternoon, trapping Margarita Jackson between the 56th and 57th floors of Meridian Financial Tower for what would become the most important 43 minutes of both her and Ryan Martinez's lives. Ryan had been restocking cleaning supplies in the service corridor when the building's emergency system crackled to life, announcing a mechanical failure in the executive elevator. His supervisor, Frank Rodriguez, was handling another emergency 3 floors down, a burst pipe in the law offices, leaving Ryan as the only maintenance staff member available to respond to what seemed like a routine service call. Probably just needs a manual reset, Ryan muttered to himself, gathering his basic tools and heading toward the executive elevator bank. The building's older elevators were notorious for minor glitches, usually resolved within minutes by cycling the power system or adjusting the door sensors. He'd performed the procedure dozens of times over the past 2 years, a mindless task that required more patience than skill. But when the elevator doors slid open to reveal their occupant, Ryan felt his breath catch in his throat. Margarita Jackson sat motionless in her wheelchair, positioned in the elevator's center, with the defeated posture he'd seen too many times in his former life. The slumped shoulders and vacant stare of someone who had stopped fighting against their circumstances. She was impeccably dressed in a navy cashmere sweater and pearl necklace, but her eyes held the hollow emptiness that money couldn't touch. "Ma'am, I'm Ryan from building maintenance," he said gently, stepping into the elevator's confined space. "We'll have this fixed in just a few minutes. Are you feeling all right?" Margarita looked up at him with surprise, as if she'd forgotten that other people existed in the world. Her voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. "I'm fine, just tired." Ryan's trained eyes immediately assessed Margarita's positioning in the wheelchair, noting the way her hands rested limply in her lap and the slight forward lean that suggested weak core muscles. Years of physical therapy experience had taught him to read body language like a medical chart, and everything about Margarita's posture screamed of someone who had abandoned the basic exercises that maintained whatever function remained after spinal cord injury. As he began examining the elevator's control panel, Ryan noticed Margarita's breathing pattern, shallow and irregular, the kind of respiratory compromise that developed when patients stopped maintaining their lung capacity through proper positioning and movement. Her hands, though manicured and adorned with expensive rings, showed the telltale signs of muscle atrophy that came from months of inactivity. "The building's getting old," Ryan said conversationally as he worked, hoping to distract her from what was clearly a distressing situation. "These elevators were state-of-the-art in 1987, but they need more maintenance than my supervisor likes to admit."
36 years, Margarita said, unexpectedly. "I've been coming to this building for 36 years, watching my daughter build her empire. I used to take the stairs sometimes, just to get exercise." Her voice carried a bitter edge. "Funny how much you miss simple things like climbing stairs when you can't do them anymore." Ryan's hand stilled on the control panel. In his former life, he'd heard similar statements from hundreds of patients, the grief for lost abilities that went far beyond physical function. But something in Margarita's tone, the particular quality of hopelessness, triggered memories of his most challenging cases and the breakthroughs that had made his career. "Mrs. Jackson?" "Margarita Jackson." "Mrs. Jackson, I hope you don't mind me asking, but how long has it been since your injury?" Margarita's eyes sharpened slightly, the first sign of real engagement he'd seen from her. 18 months. Why? Ryan continued working on the elevator while carefully choosing his words. "I used to work in rehabilitation before this job. Spinal cord injuries can be complicated. The body has ways of compensating that most people don't realize." "The doctors have been very clear about my prognosis," Margarita said, her voice hardening. "Complete T12 injury, permanent paralysis, no hope of recovery. I've heard it from every specialist in New York." "I'm sure they're right about the medical aspects, but sometimes there's a difference between recovery and improvement, between healing and adaptation." Margarita was quiet for a long moment, studying his face with intensity that made him self-conscious about his janitor's uniform and the obvious contrast between his current circumstances and the medical knowledge he was displaying. "You said you used to work in rehabilitation. What happened? Why are you—" Cleaning buildings instead of helping people walk? Ryan finished with a rueful smile. Long story. Bad lawsuit, false accusations. The medical board doesn't care much about the truth when lawyers get involved. The elevator gave a mechanical shudder, and Ryan quickly resumed his work on the control panel. But Margarita's attention remained fixed on him with the first spark of curiosity he'd seen from her. What kind of rehabilitation? Physical therapy, specialized in spinal cord injury recovery and adaptive movement training. I spent 7 years helping people rediscover what their bodies could do after trauma. Not magic, not false hope, just finding new ways to live. And you think my situation is different from what the doctors have told me? Ryan paused his work entirely, turning to face her with the kind of direct eye contact he'd once used to assess whether patients were ready to hear difficult truths. I think, he said slowly, that your body has probably lost a lot of function that has nothing to do with your spinal cord injury. Muscle atrophy, respiratory decline, circulatory problems, things that happen when someone stops moving entirely, even the parts that still work. Margarita's breathing had changed, becoming deeper and more focused. Go on. I can see from how you're sitting that your core strength has probably declined significantly. Your shoulders are rolled forward, which suggests your upper body muscles have weakened. Your hands, he gestured gently toward her lap, they're positioned like someone who's forgotten that they still have full function in their arms and upper torso. The physical therapists all said the same thing, Margarita said, but there was less certainty in her voice now. Maintain what function I have, prevent complications, adapt to my new reality. That's not wrong, but it's not complete either. Your spinal cord injury is permanent. I'm not suggesting otherwise. But the strength, endurance, and coordination you can develop in your unaffected areas, that's limited only by how much work you're willing to do. The elevator gave another mechanical groan, and the lights flickered briefly. Ryan returned to the control panel, but Margarita's voice stopped him. "Show me," she said quietly. "Ma'am? Show me what you mean about my positioning, my strength. Show me what you see that the other therapists missed." Ryan's heart rate accelerated. What she was asking could cost him his job, potentially expose him to liability issues, and almost certainly violate building protocols about maintenance staff interacting with residents. But looking at Margarita's face, the first expression of hope he'd seen there, he realized that some rules were meant to be broken. "Just positioning," he said, moving closer to her wheelchair. "Just nothing that could be considered medical treatment, just observing body mechanics." With the gentle precision that had once made him one of Mount Sinai's most requested therapists, Ryan began explaining what he saw, the subtle ways that months of depression and inactivity had compromised even her unaffected muscle groups, the breathing patterns that suggested her diaphragm had weakened, and the hand positioning that indicated her fine motor control was deteriorating from disuse rather than injury. As he spoke, demonstrating proper spinal alignment and optimal wheelchair positioning, Margarita's posture began to change. Her shoulders straightened, her breathing deepened, and her hands moved to positions that engaged dormant muscle groups in her arms and upper back. "My God," she whispered as she felt muscles activate that had been dormant for months. "I can feel the difference." "It's not magic," he said quickly. "It's just basic biomechanics. Your body wants to work efficiently. It just needs to remember how." The elevator suddenly lurched back to life, the lights stabilizing, and the floor indicator resuming its normal function. But neither Ryan nor Margarita moved as the car began its smooth ascent to the 57th floor. "Mr. Martinez, I would very much like to continue this conversation."
The doors slid open to reveal the opulent penthouse lobby, but Margarita remained motionless, her eyes fixed on Ryan's face with an intensity that suggested she was seeing him clearly for the first time. "I could be fired for what just happened," Ryan said quietly. "Then we'll have to make sure that doesn't happen." Margarita replied, her voice carrying a strength and determination that had been absent just minutes before. "Won't we?" As Ryan stepped back to allow her to exit the elevator, he realized that 43 minutes trapped between floors had changed everything. Not just for Margarita, who was sitting straighter and breathing deeper than she had in months, but for him as well. For the first time since the lawsuit had destroyed his career, he had remembered what it felt like to help someone rediscover hope. The elevator doors, closed between them, but Ryan knew with absolute certainty that this was not the end of their encounter. It was only the beginning. The security footage review took place at 7:30 a.m. sharp the following morning in the sterile conference room on the third floor of Meridian Financial Tower. Ryan sat across from his supervisor, Frank Rodriguez, and building security chief, Patricia Winters, watching grainy elevator camera footage of his 43-minute encounter with Margarita Jackson on a monitor that made everything look slightly sinister in black and white. "Care to explain what exactly you were doing in there, Martinez?" Patricia asked, her voice carrying the tone of someone who had already reached her conclusions. She was a former NYPD detective who treated building security with the same intensity she'd once brought to homicide investigations, and Ryan could see she wasn't particularly interested in his explanations. "The elevator was malfunctioning," Ryan said, keeping his voice steady despite the knot of anxiety forming in his stomach. "I was performing standard maintenance procedures to get it operational again." Frank fast-forwarded through several minutes of footage, stopping at a frame that showed Ryan positioned close to Margarita's wheelchair, his hands gesturing as he spoke. "Standard maintenance procedures don't typically involve extended conversations with residents, especially residents like Mrs. Jackson. She seemed distressed about being trapped. I was trying to keep her calm while I worked on the problem." Patricia leaned forward, pointing at the screen. "This doesn't look like keeping someone calm. This looks like you're examining her, touching her wheelchair, adjusting her position. What's your medical background, Martinez?" The question Ryan had been dreading since the moment he'd seen the security cameras in the elevator. His employment application had been deliberately vague about his previous work history, listing only healthcare administration and hoping that a building maintenance company wouldn't dig deeper into his credentials. His mouth went dry. If they had conducted a thorough background investigation, they would have discovered his physical therapy license, the malpractice lawsuit, and the circumstances that had forced him out of medical practice. He could already envision the conversation where they accused him of misrepresenting his qualifications and violating building policies by providing unauthorized medical advice to a resident. "Look," Frank said, his tone softening slightly. "I like you, Ryan. You're reliable, you do good work, and you've never caused problems before. But Mrs. Jackson isn't just any resident. She's Victoria Jackson's mother, which means she's essentially untouchable. If something had gone wrong in that elevator, if she had been injured, or if her family decided you had overstepped your boundaries, this company could face a lawsuit that would put us all out of business." "I understand the concerns," Ryan said, "but I was just trying to help someone who was clearly in distress." "That's exactly the problem," Patricia interjected. "Your job is building maintenance, not helping residents with their personal problems. We have very clear protocols about staff interactions with tenants, especially tenants who require special accommodations." Frank pulled out another document, this one bearing the letterhead of Meridian Property Management. "The company has decided that your actions, while well-intentioned, represent a serious violation of workplace protocols and potential liability exposure. Effective immediately, you're being terminated from your position." The words hit Ryan like a physical blow. 2 years of steady employment, the only job he'd been able to find after his medical career ended, gone because he tried to help someone who reminded him why he'd become a physical therapist. "Frank, please," Ryan began. "I need this job. My sister's medical bills, my rent, I can't afford to be unemployed right now." "I'm sorry, Ryan. The decision came from corporate headquarters. There's nothing I can do to change it." Patricia slid a final document across the table. "You'll need to sign this acknowledging receipt of your termination notice and confirming that you understand the confidentiality requirements regarding any interactions you may have had with building residents." Ryan read through the legal language, recognizing it as a carefully worded document designed to prevent him from discussing his encounter with Margarita Jackson with anyone, including potential employers or the media. The message was clear: disappear quietly and don't cause problems for people more powerful than yourself. "What if Mrs. Jackson herself requested my assistance?" Ryan asked, grasping for any argument that might save his job. "What if she was satisfied with the help I provided?" Frank and Patricia exchanged glances. "Has Mrs. Jackson contacted you since yesterday's incident?" Patricia asked. "No, but then I think we can assume that whatever happened in that elevator was a one-time occurrence that won't be repeated," Frank said firmly. "Ryan, you're a good guy, but you're also someone who doesn't understand his place in this building's hierarchy. That makes you a liability we can't afford." As Ryan cleaned out his small locker in the building's basement, packing his few personal belongings into a cardboard box, he reflected on the bitter irony of his situation. For the second time in his life, he was being punished for using his medical knowledge to help someone who needed assistance. The false accusations that had ended his physical therapy career had at least been dramatic, a patient claiming he had caused additional injury through negligent treatment. This termination was quieter, but equally devastating, losing his job simply for caring about someone else's suffering. The subway ride back to Brooklyn felt different than his usual commute. Instead of the familiar rhythm of traveling to work, he was returning home in the middle of the morning with no prospect of employment and no clear plan for how he would manage his financial obligations. Carmen's medical bills wouldn't pause for his job search, and his landlord had already warned him about late rent payments. His studio apartment felt smaller and more cramped than usual when he unlocked the door at 10:15 a.m. The physical therapy textbooks he'd been reading seemed to mock him from their shelf, reminders of expertise he wasn't allowed to use and knowledge that had become more burden than blessing. He sat on his unmade bed, surrounded by the debris of a life that had never quite recovered from his first professional disaster, and tried to figure out what came next. The knock on his door came at 11:30 a.m., startling him from his contemplation of unemployment websites that offered nothing relevant to his skills or experience. Through the peephole, he could see a woman in an expensive navy suit, her silver hair styled in a way that suggested professional success and personal authority. She looked completely out of place in his building's narrow hallway, like a luxury car parked in a junkyard. "Mr. Martinez?" the woman said when he opened the door. "My name is Victoria Jackson. I believe you met my mother yesterday." Ryan's heart rate accelerated as he recognized the billionaire whose mother he had tried to help. Victoria Jackson's presence in his apartment building meant that his interaction with Margarita had not been unnoticed by the family, and he couldn't imagine that her personal visit to his home would result in anything positive for his already precarious situation. "Mrs. Jackson, I'm sorry if there was any misunderstanding about yesterday's incident. I was just trying to help your mother while the elevator was malfunctioning." Victoria's expression was unreadable as she studied his face. "Mr. Martinez, may I come in? I think we need to have a conversation about exactly what happened in that elevator, and more importantly, what you did for my mother that 15 months of expensive medical treatment couldn't accomplish." As Ryan stepped aside to allow Victoria Jackson into his modest apartment, he realized that his termination from the building maintenance job might be only the beginning of his problems. But looking at Victoria's face, he also sensed something unexpected. Not anger or accusation, but a desperate kind of hope that suggested his encounter with Margarita had consequences he couldn't have predicted. The collision between his working-class world and the Jackson family's wealth was about to become far more complicated than a simple elevator malfunction, and Ryan had no idea whether that complication would destroy what remained of his life or offer him a chance at redemption he had never dared to imagine. Victoria Jackson sat delicately on the edge of Ryan's worn couch,
her designer suit a stark contrast to the faded fabric and secondhand furniture that filled his studio apartment. She held a cup of instant coffee that he'd nervously prepared, though she hadn't taken a single sip since he'd handed it to her 10 minutes ago. Instead, she seemed to be studying every detail of his living space: the expired physical therapy license on the wall, the medical textbooks stacked on his nightstand, and the pile of bills scattered across his small dining table. "My mother hasn't spoken this much in 6 months," Victoria said finally, breaking the silence that had stretched between them since she'd declined his offer to sit at his small kitchen table. "Yesterday evening, she called me into her room and talked for 2 straight hours about body mechanics, respiratory therapy, and something called adaptive positioning. She hasn't used that many words consecutively since her accident." Ryan remained standing near his kitchenette, uncertain whether Victoria's presence represented an opportunity or a threat. "I hope I didn't upset her by overstepping any boundaries. I was just trying to keep her calm while I fixed the elevator."
"Mr. Martinez," Victoria said, finally looking directly at him with the intense focus that had made her legendary in financial circles. "Let's dispense with the pretense that you're simply a building maintenance worker who happens to know advanced rehabilitation techniques. I had my security team conduct a thorough background investigation after my mother's enthusiastic report about your conversation." Ryan felt his stomach drop. If Victoria Jackson's security team had dug into his past, they would have uncovered everything: his physical therapy career, the malpractice lawsuit, the circumstances that had forced him into menial labor. He waited for the accusations, the threats, the legal consequences that seemed to follow him whenever his medical background was discovered. "Dr. Ryan Martinez," Victoria continued, pulling a manila folder from her briefcase. "Licensed physical therapist, graduated summa cum laude from Columbia University's rehabilitation program. 7 years at Mount Sinai Hospital, specializing in spinal cord injury recovery. Winner of the 2019 Excellence in Patient Care Award from the New York Physical Therapy Association." She paused, opening the folder to reveal what appeared to be a comprehensive dossier on his life and career. Also, the defendant in a malpractice lawsuit filed by the family of Rebecca Thompson, who claimed that your treatment protocols caused permanent nerve damage during her recovery from a motorcycle accident. "The charges were false," Ryan said quietly, the familiar shame and anger rising in his chest. "Rebecca was working with her boyfriend to defraud the insurance company. She was already walking normally when she claimed I had caused additional paralysis." "I know," Victoria said simply. "My investigators spoke with 3 nurses who witnessed Rebecca walking unassisted in hospital corridors during the period when she was claiming total paralysis. They also discovered that her boyfriend had researched malpractice settlements extensively before encouraging her to file the lawsuit." Ryan stared at her, speechless. In 2 years since the lawsuit had destroyed his career, no one, not his lawyer, not the medical board, not even his former colleagues, had bothered to conduct the kind of investigation that could have cleared his name. The medical board's investigation was deliberately superficial. Rebecca's family had connections with several board members, and the insurance company preferred to settle quietly rather than fight a public battle. Your career was sacrificed to avoid bad publicity and legal expenses. "Why are you telling me this?" Ryan asked, his voice hoarse with suppressed emotion. Victoria set her untouched coffee cup on his small side table and leaned forward slightly. "Because my mother has been dying slowly for 18 months, not from her physical injuries, but from despair. Every specialist I've consulted has told me the same thing: complete T12 spinal cord injury, permanent paralysis, focus on adaptation rather than improvement. But yesterday, in the space of 43 minutes, you gave her something that 15 months of expensive medical care couldn't provide. I just helped her with basic positioning. Any competent physical therapist could have." "No," Victoria interrupted firmly. Any competent physical therapist could have taught her proper wheelchair positioning, but most competent physical therapists are focused on managing her condition rather than challenging her assumptions about what's possible. You saw potential where everyone else saw limitation. She stood up and walked to the window that overlooked the narrow alley behind Ryan's building, her silhouette framed against the morning light. When she spoke again, her voice carried a vulnerability that seemed at odds with her reputation for ruthless business dealing. "My mother raised me alone after my father died when I was 7, Victoria said. She worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat, cleaning office buildings at night, working as a seamstress during the day, and taking care of an elderly neighbor's children in the evenings. I never saw her rest, never heard her complain, never watched her give up on anything." Ryan listened in silence, beginning to understand that Victoria's visit was about more than just her interaction with Margarita. She put herself through night school to become a bookkeeper, then used that job to learn about business and finance. By the time I graduated from high school, she had saved enough money to help pay for my college education. When I started my investment firm, she was my first employee and my most trusted advisor. Victoria turned back toward Ryan, and he could see tears gathering in her eyes despite her composed demeanor. "The woman who raised me, who built a life from nothing and taught me that determination could overcome any obstacle, has spent the past 18 months convinced that her life is effectively over. Every doctor has reinforced that belief, telling her to accept her limitations and lower her expectations. But yesterday," she continued, her voice growing stronger, "she called me to describe how different she felt after talking with you. For the first time since her accident, she used words like possibility and improvement instead of acceptance." Ryan felt a complex mixture of hope and terror. Victoria Jackson's resources could potentially restore his medical career, clear his name, and provide him with opportunities he had never dared to imagine. "Miss Jackson," he said carefully, "I appreciate you sharing this with me, and I'm glad that my conversation with your mother was helpful. But I'm not licensed to practice physical therapy anymore, and even if I were, your mother's condition requires specialized care that goes beyond what any single therapist can provide." "What if it didn't?" Victoria asked. "What if, instead of working within a system that prioritizes liability management over patient care, you had the resources to develop exactly the kind of rehabilitation program you think would be most effective?" The suggestion hung in the air between them, heavy with implications that Ryan was afraid to fully consider. "I'm not sure I understand what you're proposing." Victoria returned to the couch. But instead of sitting, she remained standing with the focused intensity of someone presenting a business proposition. "I'm proposing that you come work for me, privately, developing and implementing a comprehensive rehabilitation program specifically designed for my mother. Not as a licensed physical therapist bound by institutional protocols, but as a wellness consultant with complete freedom to innovate." "That would be incredibly risky for both of us," Ryan said. "If something went wrong, if your mother was injured or if her condition worsened, the legal consequences would be my responsibility, not yours," Victoria finished. "I have the best lawyers in New York, unlimited financial resources, and most importantly, a mother who is currently choosing to die slowly rather than fight for recovery. The risk of doing nothing is far greater than the risk of trying something unconventional." Ryan walked to his small dining table and picked up one of Carmen's medical bills, studying the numbers that represented months of financial stress and difficult choices. The irony of his situation was almost overwhelming. He possessed knowledge and skills that could potentially help Margarita Jackson, but he lacked the credentials and resources to apply them legally. Victoria Jackson had unlimited resources, but no access to the kind of innovative thinking that might actually make a difference in her mother's recovery. "There would have to be conditions," Ryan said slowly. "Full medical monitoring by licensed physicians, gradual progression with safety protocols, and most importantly, your mother would have to be a willing participant, not someone who's being pressured into treatment she doesn't believe in." "Agreed," Victoria said immediately. "What else?" Ryan thought about the investigation that had cleared his name, the career that had been destroyed by false accusations, and the possibility of redemption that Victoria was offering. I want the evidence about Rebecca Thompson's fraud presented to the state medical board. I want my professional reputation restored, not for ego, but because other people might benefit from techniques I've developed. Done, Victoria said. My legal team will file the necessary paperwork within the week. And I want to be paid fairly for my expertise, not treated like charity case or someone who should be grateful for the opportunity. Victoria smiled for the first time since entering his apartment. Mr. Martinez, I didn't build a billion-dollar company by undervaluing the people who could help me achieve my goals. I'm prepared to offer you more money than you've probably imagined, plus full support for developing whatever rehabilitation program you think would be most effective. As Ryan looked around his cramped apartment, considering the offer that could transform not just his financial situation but his entire understanding of what might be possible in his life, he realized that his 43 minutes trapped in an elevator with Margarita Jackson had set in motion changes that went far beyond a simple human connection. Victoria Jackson wasn't just offering him a job, she was offering him a chance to reclaim the professional identity that had been stolen from him, to use his knowledge in service of someone who desperately needed hope, and to discover whether his unconventional approaches to rehabilitation could achieve results that traditional medicine had deemed impossible. The question was whether he had the courage to risk everything again on the possibility that this time doing the right thing might actually lead to redemption rather than ruin. The contract negotiations took place 3 days later in Victoria Jackson's private office on the 68th floor of Meridian Financial Tower, the same building where Ryan had been terminated less than a week earlier. The irony of returning as a highly compensated consultant rather than a minimum wage janitor wasn't lost on him as he rode the executive elevator to floors he'd never been authorized to access during his 2 years of employment. Victoria's office was a masterpiece of understated luxury. Floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of Manhattan, artwork that Ryan suspected was worth more than most people's homes, and a conference table where she had spread out legal documents that would formalize the most extraordinary opportunity of his professional life. The base salary is $200,000, Victoria said, pointing to a specific clause in the employment contract, plus performance bonuses tied to measurable improvements in my mother's physical function and quality of life metrics, full health insurance, legal protection, and a research budget of $50,000 quarterly for equipment, training, or additional resources you deem necessary. Ryan read through the compensation package twice, hardly believing the numbers on the page. 6 months ago, he had been struggling to pay his sister's medical bills on a janitor's salary. Now he was being offered more money than he had earned in his entire career as a licensed physical therapist. There's also this, Victoria added, sliding another document across the table. My legal team has filed a formal complaint with the New York State Medical Board requesting a full review of your license suspension. They've included the evidence regarding Rebecca Thompson's fraud, witness statements from the hospital staff, and documentation of the irregularities in the original investigation. The letterhead bore the name of Patterson, Crenshaw and Associates, one of Manhattan's most prestigious law firms. Ryan had researched their reputation after Victoria mentioned them. They were the kind of attorneys who typically represent Fortune 500 companies in billion-dollar litigation, not individual physical therapists seeking license reinstatement. "Why are you investing this much in clearing my name?" Ryan asked. "Even if the medical board reverses their decision, I would still be working for you privately rather than in a hospital or clinic setting." Victoria leaned back in her leather chair, her expression thoughtful. "Because I've learned that half measures rarely produce extraordinary results. If I want you to develop an innovative rehabilitation program for my mother, you need to believe that your career can be fully restored. People who think they have nothing left to lose sometimes make desperate choices. People who believe in their future make strategic ones."
The insight revealed Victoria's sophisticated understanding of human psychology, the same analytical thinking that had built her financial empire.
She wasn't just hiring Ryan's technical skills, she was investing in his confidence and long-term commitment to her mother's recovery. There are conditions, of course, Victoria continued, opening a second folder. Complete confidentiality regarding all aspects of my mother's care and our family's private medical information. Regular progress reports submitted to Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, the neurologist who's been overseeing my mother's care since her accident. And most importantly, immediate termination of the arrangement if my mother requests it or if her primary physician determines that your methods pose any risk to her safety. Ryan nodded, recognizing the reasonableness of her requirements. What about your mother's consent to this arrangement? Has she agreed to work with me on an ongoing basis? That, Victoria said with a slight smile, is something you'll need to discuss with her directly. She's waiting to meet with you downstairs. 20 minutes later, Ryan found himself in Margarita Jackson's private sitting room, a spacious area adjacent to her bedroom that had been carefully designed to accommodate her wheelchair while maintaining the elegance of a luxury penthouse. She was positioned by the windows overlooking Central Park, wearing a cream-colored sweater and looking significantly more alert than she had during their elevator encounter. "Mr. Martinez," Margarita said as he entered the room, "I understand my daughter has made you quite an offer." "She has," Ryan replied, taking a seat in the chair she indicated across from her. "But the most important question is whether you're interested in working with me. This kind of intensive rehabilitation requires commitment from both the therapist and the patient." Margarita studied his face with the same penetrating intelligence he'd seen in her daughter. "The doctors have all told me that improvement beyond my current level is essentially impossible. Are you suggesting they're wrong?" "I'm suggesting they may be defining improvement too narrowly. Your spinal cord injury is permanent. I'm not going to give you false hope about walking again. But there are aspects of strength, coordination, endurance, and independence that can be developed far beyond what most patients achieve." "Show me what you mean." Ryan moved closer to her wheelchair, his trained eyes automatically assessing her posture and positioning. "May I demonstrate some basic techniques? Nothing invasive, just adjustments to how you're sitting that might make a difference in how you feel." Margarita nodded, and Ryan began the same gentle corrections he had shown her in the elevator. Within minutes, her breathing had deepened, her shoulders had straightened, and her hands were positioned to engage muscle groups that had been dormant for months. "The difference is immediate," she said with surprise. "But is it sustainable? Can these improvements actually build on each other over time?" "That depends on how much work you're willing to do," Ryan said honestly. "Traditional physical therapy focuses on maintaining function and preventing deterioration. What I'm proposing is more aggressive, building new neural pathways, developing compensatory strength, and pushing the boundaries of what's considered possible for someone with your type of injury." Margarita was quiet for several minutes, apparently weighing his words against months of medical opinions that had emphasized limitation rather than possibility. When she spoke again, her voice carried a determination that reminded Ryan of why Victoria had become so successful. "Mr. Martinez, I'm 74 years old. For 18 months, I've been told to accept my circumstances and focus on adaptation rather than improvement. I've spent every day since my accident feeling like my life is essentially over, that I'm simply waiting to die while being an increasing burden on my daughter." She paused, looking out at the park, where people were walking, running, and living lives that seemed impossibly distant from her wheelchair-bound existence. "Yesterday was the first time since my accident that I felt like my body might still have potential I haven't explored. If you think there's a chance, even a small chance, that I can become stronger, more independent, more capable than I am right now, then I'm willing to work as hard as necessary to find out." Ryan felt the familiar surge of purpose that had originally drawn him to rehabilitation medicine, the possibility of helping someone reclaim abilities they thought were lost forever. But this time,
Instead of working within the constraints of insurance limitations and institutional protocols, he would have unlimited resources and complete freedom to innovate. The program I'm envisioning would be intense. Daily sessions, potentially uncomfortable exercises, and a lot of trial and error as we figure out what techniques work best for your specific situation. There would be setbacks, frustrations, and no guarantees about outcomes. But there would also be the possibility of improvement beyond what anyone has told me to expect. Yes, there would definitely be that possibility. Margarita extended her hand to him, her grip stronger than he had anticipated. Then let's begin, Mr. Martinez. I've spent 18 months learning to accept my limitations. It's time to discover what I might still be capable of achieving. As Ryan shook her hand, he realized that he was embarking on more than just an unconventional rehabilitation program. He was joining a family's fight against despair, using his knowledge to challenge medical assumptions that had consigned Margarita to a life of diminishing expectations. The arrangement with Victoria offered him financial security, professional redemption, and a chance to practice physical therapy without the bureaucratic constraints that he had often frustrated in hospital settings. But more importantly, it gave him the opportunity to find out whether his innovative approaches could actually achieve the kind of results that would justify the faith both women were placing in his abilities. Outside the penthouse windows, New York City continued its relentless pace of ambition and struggle. But inside this carefully appointed sitting room, 3 people were about to begin a collaboration that would test the boundaries of medical possibility and the power of human determination to overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles. The real work was about to begin, and for the first time since his career had been destroyed by false accusations, Ryan felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. The custom rehabilitation equipment arrived at the penthouse over a period of 3 weeks, transforming Margarita's spacious sitting room into what Ryan privately thought of as the most luxurious physical therapy facility in Manhattan. Parallel bars rated for full body weight support, an adjustable treatment table that could accommodate any position necessary for therapeutic work, resistance bands and weights in every conceivable resistance level, and electronic stimulation equipment that would have been the envy of any hospital rehabilitation department. "This is considerably more sophisticated than what I'm used to working with," Ryan admitted to Victoria as they surveyed the installation of a specialized wheelchair with removable components that would allow for advanced transfer training. Most hospital PT departments make do with equipment that's 20 years old and barely functional. "I've learned that investing in the right tools usually pays for itself through better outcomes," Victoria replied, checking items off a comprehensive list that had grown to 3 pages during their planning sessions. "Besides, if this program is successful with my mother, I'm considering funding a private rehabilitation center that could serve other families dealing with similar challenges." The comment revealed an aspect of Victoria's thinking that had become apparent during their initial weeks of collaboration. She approached every project with an eye towards scalability and broader impact. Even her mother's personal recovery was being viewed as a potential proof of concept for innovations that could help others. Ryan had developed a structured assessment protocol during the first week of their arrangement, carefully documenting Margarita's baseline capabilities across dozens of metrics that traditional rehabilitation programs rarely measured. Her grip strength was approximately 60% of normal for her age group. Her core stability was significantly compromised, despite her upper body remaining unaffected by the spinal cord injury. And her cardiovascular endurance had declined to levels typically seen in patients 20 years older. "The good news," he explained to both women during their weekly progress meeting, "is that almost all of these deficits are reversible with appropriate intervention. Mrs. Jackson's nervous system above the level of her injury is completely intact, which means we're dealing with deconditioning rather than permanent damage." Margarita leaned forward in her wheelchair, her interest evident in the way she focused completely on his explanations. "What kind of improvements are we talking about? Specific numbers, not vague promises about feeling better." Ryan appreciated her directness.
Too many patients wanted reassurance rather than realistic expectations. But Margarita had made it clear from their first session that she preferred honest assessments to comforting platitudes. Based on your current baseline and the intensity of the program we're implementing, I would expect to see measurable strength gains within 4 weeks, significant improvements in transferability and wheelchair handling within 8 weeks, and substantial progress in activities of daily living within 12 weeks. Define substantial, Victoria interjected with precision that made her effective in financial negotiations. Independence in most personal care tasks, ability to navigate architectural barriers that currently limit her mobility, stamina for extended social activities, and overall physical confidence that would allow her to engage with the world more actively. The program Ryan had designed differed dramatically from the maintenance-focused therapy Margarita had received during her initial rehabilitation. Instead of brief sessions aimed at preventing deterioration, they worked together for 3 hours each morning, focusing on progressive overload principles adapted for wheelchair users. Every exercise was designed to build on previous gains, pushing her body to adapt to increasingly challenging demands. The key insight, he explained to Victoria during one of their private consultations, is that most spinal cord injury rehabilitation stops far short of what's actually possible. Medical professionals are so focused on preventing additional injury that they rarely explore the full potential of unaffected muscle groups. Their daily sessions had developed a rhythm that reminded Ryan of his most successful cases from his hospital career. Margarita arrived each morning with a determination that was both inspiring and slightly intimidating, ready to push herself through exercises that would have challenged patients half her age. Her competitive streak, dormant during months of depression, had resurged with a vengeance once she began seeing measurable progress. "I want to try the advanced transfer sequence today," she announced during their 4th week of working together, referring to a wheelchair-to-bed technique that required significant upper body strength and coordination. "That's probably premature. Your arm strength has improved dramatically, but the timing and balance components of that transfer are quite complex." "Mr. Martinez," she said with a slight smile that reminded her of her daughter's business negotiations, "I didn't ask you whether you thought I was ready. I told you what I want to attempt today." Ryan recognized the tone of someone who had made a decision and wouldn't be dissuaded by practical concerns. It was the same stubborn determination that had allowed her to raise Victoria as a single mother while building a career from nothing, now channeled into physical rehabilitation with laser-like focus. They spent an hour breaking down the transfer into component movements, practicing each element separately before attempting the complete sequence. Margarita's first effort was shaky but successful, her second attempt was smoother, and by her 5th repetition, she was performing the transfer with confidence that surprised even Ryan. "How does that compare to what you expected from me?" she asked, slightly out of breath but clearly exhilarated by her success. "It's about 3 weeks ahead of the timeline I had projected," Ryan admitted. "Your motor learning speed is remarkable for any age, but especially impressive given that you hadn't attempted new physical skills for over a year." Their relationship had evolved beyond the formal therapist-patient dynamic typical of medical settings. Margarita challenged his assumptions about what was possible for someone with her type of injury, while he provided the technical knowledge and structured progression that channeled her determination into measurable improvements. They had become collaborators in an experiment that was yielding results neither had fully anticipated. "There's something else," Margarita said as they concluded their session. "I want to show Victoria what I've accomplished, but not in a clinical demonstration. I want to surprise her by doing something she assumes I can't do anymore." Ryan paused in his documentation of her progress, intrigued by the request. "What did you have in mind?" "Before my accident, Victoria and I had dinner together every Sunday evening. We would cook together in my kitchen, something we'd done since she was a child. She's been having meals brought to my room since I came home from the hospital because she assumes I can't safely manage kitchen tasks anymore. The idea of Margarita preparing a meal would indeed require a complex integration of the skills they'd been developing. Transfers between different surfaces, manipulation of objects at various heights, sustained activity requiring both strength and endurance. It would also represent a return to an activity that held deep emotional significance for both women. "That would be challenging," Ryan said slowly, already beginning to analyze the physical demands involved. Kitchen work requires constant adaptation to different tasks, reaching in multiple directions, managing hot surfaces and sharp objects. The safety considerations alone are manageable with proper preparation and adaptive techniques, Margarita finished. "I've been thinking about this for weeks, Mr. Martinez. I know my limitations, but I also know what I've accomplished in the past month. I think I'm ready to try something that matters beyond just exercises and strength measurements." Ryan looked at her face, seeing the same expression he'd noticed during their elevator encounter, a flicker of hope that had grown stronger with each successful session. The technical challenges of cooking from a wheelchair were significant, but the psychological impact of reclaiming an activity that connected her to her pre-accident relationship with Victoria could be transformative. "We would need to practice every component extensively," he said finally. "Plan the entire sequence, modify techniques for wheelchair access, and have safety protocols in place for anything involving heat or sharp implements." Margarita's smile was the brightest he'd seen from her since they'd begun working together. "I was hoping you'd say yes, because I've already planned the menu, and Sunday is only 4 days away." As Ryan began mentally cataloging the skills they would need to develop in the next 4 days, he realized that their rehabilitation program had evolved into something far more ambitious than either he or Victoria had originally envisioned. They weren't just rebuilding Margarita's physical capabilities. They were reconstructing her identity as someone capable of contributing meaningfully to the relationships and activities that had defined her life before the accident. The question was whether 4 days would be enough time to prepare her for a challenge that would test not just her physical recovery, but her emotional readiness to reclaim her role as Victoria's mother rather than her patient. The phone call came at 6:47 a.m. on Friday morning, 2 days before Margarita's planned Sunday dinner surprise. Ryan answered groggily, expecting Carmen with news about her latest medical checkup, but instead heard the crisp, authoritative voice of someone he didn't recognize. "Mr. Martinez, this is Dr. Jonathan Blackwell, Director of Rehabilitation Services at Mount Sinai Hospital. I understand you've been providing unlicensed medical services to members of the Jackson family." Ryan sat up immediately, his heart rate accelerating as he processed the implications of the call. Dr. Blackwell's name was familiar from his research into spinal cord injury specialists. He was considered one of New York's most prominent neurological rehabilitation experts and had an established relationship with many of the city's wealthiest families. "I'm working as a private wellness consultant, Dr. Blackwell. All of my activities have been conducted with full medical oversight and the explicit consent of Mrs. Jackson and her family." "Mr. Martinez, we need to discuss this situation in person. My office, today at 2 p.m. I trust you understand the seriousness of practicing medicine without a license, particularly with a patient as prominent as Mrs. Jackson." The line went dead before Ryan could respond, leaving him staring at his phone with a growing sense of dread. Dr. Blackwell's tone had carried the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to having his directives followed without question, and his emphasis on Margarita's prominence suggested that this wasn't simply a professional call. Ryan spent the morning researching Dr. Blackwell's background, discovering a career built on conservative treatment approaches and a reputation for protecting wealthy patients from what he considered experimental or unproven therapies. His published papers emphasized acceptance and adaptation for spinal cord injury patients, with strong warnings against rehabilitation protocols that might create false hope or unrealistic expectations. The Mount Sinai building felt different when Ryan entered it as a potential adversary rather than a respected colleague. The security guard who checked his identification seemed to scrutinize him more carefully than necessary, and the elevator ride to Dr. Blackwell's office felt like ascending to a tribunal that had already reached its verdict. Dr. Blackwell's office was a monument to medical authority, walls lined with degrees from prestigious institutions, awards for professional achievement, and photographs showing him with politicians and celebrities whose medical care had enhanced his reputation. Behind his mahogany desk, Dr. Blackwell himself appeared to be in his early 60s, with silver hair and the confident bearing of someone who had never had his medical judgment seriously questioned. "Mr. Martinez," Dr. Blackwell said without standing to greet him, "please, sit down. We have several important matters to discuss." Ryan took the indicated chair, noting that it positioned him slightly lower than Dr. Blackwell's elevated desk chair, a subtle power dynamic that seemed entirely intentional. "I've been Mrs. Jackson's consulting neurologist since her accident 18 months ago," Dr. Blackwell began, opening a thick medical file. "Her case is quite clear-cut, complete T12 spinal cord injury with permanent paralysis below the level of the lesion. The family initially consulted with me about experimental treatments, but I advised them that such interventions would be both medically inappropriate and potentially harmful." Ryan remained silent, sensing that Dr. Blackwell was building toward accusations that would be difficult to refute. "I've been Mrs. Jackson's consulting neurologist when I received a call from Mrs. Jackson's primary care physician expressing concern about dramatic changes in her physical condition and behavior. Apparently, she's been engaging in intensive physical activities that go far beyond the conservative maintenance therapy I prescribed." "Mrs. Jackson has been making remarkable progress," Ryan said carefully. "Her strength, endurance, and functional capabilities have improved significantly over the past month." "Progress toward what, exactly?" Dr. Blackwell's voice carried a sharp edge. "Mr. Martinez, false hope is one of the cruelest things we can inflict on patients with permanent disabilities. When we encourage unrealistic expectations about recovery, we set people up for devastating psychological crashes when reality inevitably reasserts itself." Ryan felt his anger building, but forced himself to respond professionally. "Dr. Blackwell, the improvements Mrs. Jackson has achieved are measurable and sustainable. We're not talking about miraculous healing. We're talking about maximizing the function of unaffected muscle groups and developing compensatory abilities." "Compensatory abilities that apparently include activities her previous medical team specifically advised against," Dr. Blackwell replied, pulling out several sheets of paper. "I have reports that she's been attempting complex transfers, engaging in high-intensity resistance training, and planning to resume cooking activities that pose significant safety risks." The specificity of Dr. Blackwell's information was alarming. Someone with access to Margarita's daily activities had been providing him with detailed reports about her rehabilitation program, but who? "Furthermore," Dr. Blackwell continued, "I've reviewed your professional history, including the circumstances that led to the suspension of your physical therapy license. A malpractice lawsuit involving negligent treatment that caused additional injury to a vulnerable patient. Exactly the kind of reckless approach that concerns me about your current activities." "That lawsuit was based on false accusations," Ryan said firmly. "The charges were fabricated by a patient attempting insurance fraud." "So you claim," Dr. Blackwell replied dismissively. "But the medical board found sufficient cause to suspend your license, which means you're currently providing unlicensed medical services to a patient whose condition you may not fully understand." Ryan realized that Dr. Blackwell had no intention of engaging with evidence about Rebecca Thompson's fraud or considering the possibility that his conservative approach might be unnecessarily limiting for patients like Margarita. This was about protecting medical orthodoxy and maintaining control over treatment decisions for high-profile patients. "Dr. Blackwell, what exactly are you proposing?" "I'm strongly advising you to cease all therapeutic activities with Mrs. Jackson immediately. If you continue providing unlicensed medical services, I'll be forced to report your activities to the appropriate regulatory authorities and recommend that the Jackson family pursue legal action to protect themselves from liability."
The threat was delivered with the calm confidence of someone who had wielded institutional power successfully for decades. Dr. Blackwell clearly expected Ryan to back down immediately rather than risk criminal charges for practicing medicine without a license. "What about Mrs. Jackson's own preferences?" Ryan asked. "She's an intelligent adult who's been fully informed about my background and the nature of our work together. Doesn't she have the right to make her own decisions about her care?" Patients with severe disabilities often lack the emotional objectivity necessary to make rational decisions about their treatment, Dr. Blackwell replied with patronizing authority. They become vulnerable to practitioners who promise unrealistic outcomes because they're desperate for any hope of improvement. Ryan felt a surge of disgust at the condescending attitude toward Margarita's intelligence and autonomy. Dr. Blackwell was essentially arguing that her disability made her incompetent to evaluate her own progress and choose her own treatment approaches. "Dr. Blackwell, Mrs. Jackson has made more functional improvement in the past month than she achieved in the previous year of traditional rehabilitation. She's stronger, more independent, and more engaged with life than she's been since her accident. How is that harmful?" "Because improvements that can't be sustained become crushing disappointments," Dr. Blackwell said firmly. "When your experimental methods inevitably fail to deliver the miraculous results you've implied, Mrs. Jackson will experience a psychological crash that could be far more devastating than her original acceptance of her limitations." The conversation was interrupted by a knock on the office door. Dr. Blackwell's secretary entered with an apologetic expression. "Doctor, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's a call for you from Victoria Jackson. She says it's urgent and relates to her mother's medical care." Dr. Blackwell's confident expression faltered slightly as he realized that his attempt to handle the situation might have been premature. Victoria Jackson was not someone who responded well to having medical decisions made without her input, and her financial resources meant she could challenge his authority in ways that most families couldn't afford. "Tell Miss Jackson I'll call her back within the hour," Dr. Blackwell said, but his tone had lost some of its earlier certainty. As Ryan left the Mount Sinai building, he understood that his work with Margarita had attracted powerful opposition from someone who viewed unconventional approaches as threats to medical authority. Dr. Blackwell's conservative philosophy and institutional connections made him a formidable adversary, but his paternalistic attitudes toward patient autonomy might also be his weakness.
The real question was whether Victoria Jackson would support Ryan's innovative methods when faced with pressure from the medical establishment, or whether she would defer to conventional authority to protect her family from potential controversy. Sunday's dinner was only 2 days away, and Ryan realized that Margarita's cooking demonstration might need to serve as more than just a family reunion. It might be the proof they needed to show that unconventional rehabilitation could achieve results that traditional medicine considered impossible. The certified letter arrived at Ryan's apartment at 8:15 a.m. on Saturday morning, delivered by a courier who required his signature and seemed unusually formal for someone handling routine mail. The return address showed the law offices of Sterling and Associates, a firm Ryan had never heard of, but whose letterhead suggested the kind of legal weight that wealthy clients could afford to deploy against problems they wanted eliminated. Ryan opened the envelope with trembling hands, already anticipating bad news, but unprepared for the comprehensive nature of the legal assault contained within the 3-page document. The letter was a formal cease and desist order, demanding that he immediately terminate all contact with Margarita Jackson and refrain from providing any form of medical, therapeutic, or wellness consultation to members of the Jackson family. "Mr. Martinez," the letter began, "our client, Dr. Jonathan Blackwell, has retained our services to address your unlawful practice of medicine without proper licensing and your endangerment of a vulnerable patient through experimental treatments that exceed your qualifications and authority." The legal language was dense and intimidating, but the core threats were clear: immediate prosecution for unlicensed medical practice, potential civil liability for any injuries resulting from his rehabilitation program, and a restraining order that would prevent him from entering the Meridian Financial Tower or contacting any members of the Jackson family. More disturbing was the letter's detailed knowledge of his work with Margarita. It referenced specific exercises they had practiced, quoted conversations about her progress, and even mentioned the planned Sunday dinner preparation. Someone with intimate access to their sessions had been providing Dr. Blackwell's legal team with comprehensive documentation of their activities. Ryan's phone buzzed with a text message from Victoria. "Need to see you immediately. Come to the penthouse through the service entrance. Don't use the main lobby." The instruction to avoid the main lobby suggested that Victoria was aware of the legal pressure being applied and was taking precautions to prevent their meeting from being observed or documented. Ryan grabbed his jacket and headed for the subway, the cease and desist letter folded in his pocket like a piece of evidence that could destroy everything they had built together. The service entrance to Meridian Financial Tower felt different now that he was entering as someone potentially under surveillance rather than as an employee with legitimate access. The security guard who had known him during his janitor days nodded with recognition, but also seemed to be studying him more carefully than usual, as if he had received instructions to monitor his movements. Victoria was waiting in her mother's sitting room when Ryan arrived, her usually composed demeanor showing cracks of stress and frustration. Margarita sat in her wheelchair nearby. Her posture reflected the strength and confidence she had developed over the past month, but her expression carried a wariness that suggested she understood the seriousness of their situation. "How bad is it?" Victoria asked without preamble, gesturing for Ryan to sit down across from them. Ryan handed her the cease and desist letter, watching her face darken as she read through the legal threats. "Dr. Blackwell is claiming that I'm practicing medicine without a license and endangering your mother through experimental treatments that exceed my qualifications and authority." "This is absurd," Victoria said, her voice carrying the cold anger that had made her legendary in business negotiations. "Mother is healthier and stronger than she's been since her accident. The improvements are obvious to anyone with eyes." "The improvements may be irrelevant if Dr. Blackwell can convince regulatory authorities that my methods are dangerous. He has institutional credibility and professional connections that I can't match. More importantly, he seems to have detailed information about our sessions that could only have come from someone with direct access to our work." Margarita leaned forward, her eyes sharpening with the analytical intelligence that reminded Ryan of her daughter. "You think someone has been spying on us?" The letter references specific conversations and exercises that weren't documented anywhere except in my private notes. Either Dr. Blackwell has access to my personal files, or someone who's been present during our sessions has been reporting to Dr. Blackwell. Victoria stood up and began pacing. Her movement patterns reflected the same agitation Ryan had observed when she was working through complex business problems. The staff who have access to this floor are all long-term employees with extensive background checks and confidentiality agreements. I can't imagine any of them would risk their careers by violating patient privacy. What about medical personnel? Nurses, physicians, other healthcare providers who might have philosophical disagreements with unconventional rehabilitation approaches. Margarita was quiet for several moments, apparently reviewing the various medical professionals who had been involved in her care since the accident. When she spoke, her voice carried a reluctant recognition. "Dr. Sarah Chen," she said slowly, "my physical medicine and rehabilitation specialist. She's been monitoring my progress through periodic consultations, and she's philosophically aligned with Dr. Blackwell's conservative approaches." Victoria stopped pacing. "Dr. Chen has been coming here twice a week for progress evaluations. She would have observed our rehabilitation sessions and had access to all of Ryan's documentation.
The revelation added another layer of complexity to their situation. Dr. Chen wasn't just a neutral observer. She was a licensed physician whose professional reputation would be enhanced by discrediting unconventional treatments that challenged established medical orthodoxy. "There's something else," Victoria said, pulling out her phone to show them a series of text messages. "Dr. Blackwell has been contacting other members of my board of directors, suggesting that my judgment regarding mother's care has been compromised by grief and desperation. He's implying that I'm vulnerable to manipulation by practitioners who promise miraculous results." Ryan felt a cold anger building in his chest. Dr. Blackwell wasn't just attacking his rehabilitation methods, he was undermining Victoria's professional reputation and suggesting that successful businesswomen became emotionally unstable when dealing with family medical crises. "He's also threatened to contact the media," Victoria continued. His messages suggested that public scrutiny of unlicensed medical practice in wealthy households might be embarrassing for all parties involved. The media threat was particularly insidious. Dr. Blackwell understood that Victoria's business empire depended on maintaining public confidence in her judgment and decision-making abilities. Negative publicity about her family's medical care could potentially affect investor confidence and business relationships worth hundreds of millions of dollars. "What are our options?" Ryan asked, though he suspected the answer wouldn't be encouraging. "Legally, we're in a difficult position," Victoria admitted. "Dr. Blackwell is technically correct that you're providing services that could be construed as medical treatment without proper licensing. Even though Mother consents to the work, and we've seen remarkable results, regulatory authorities tend to prioritize credentialing over outcomes." Margarita had been listening to their conversation with growing frustration. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the steely determination that had enabled her to raise Victoria as a single mother while building a successful career. "I refuse to allow Dr. Blackwell to dictate my medical care based on his conservative philosophy and professional jealousy," she said firmly. "Mr. Martinez has helped me achieve more functional improvement in 1 month than I experienced in the previous year of traditional therapy. I'm not going to abandon that progress because some doctor is threatened by unconventional approaches." "Mother, the legal risks," Victoria began, "are manageable if we're willing to fight," Margarita interrupted. "Dr. Blackwell is counting on us backing down rather than challenging his authority publicly. But what if we don't? What if we document my progress so thoroughly that his conservative approach looks negligent by comparison?" Ryan realized that Margarita was proposing something far more ambitious than simply defending their rehabilitation program. She was suggesting they challenge the entire medical establishment's approach to spinal cord injury recovery, using her case as evidence that patients could achieve far more than traditional therapy typically delivered. "Tomorrow's dinner preparation," Margarita continued, "isn't just about surprising Victoria anymore. It's about proving that innovative rehabilitation can restore capabilities that conservative medicine considers impossible." Victoria looked back and forth between her mother and Ryan, apparently weighing the risks of public confrontation against the potential benefits of demonstrating unconventional success. "If we're going to do this," she said finally, "we need to document everything meticulously. Video recordings, medical measurements, witness statements from neutral observers. We need evidence so compelling that Dr. Blackwell's conservative approach looks like medical malpractice by comparison." As they began planning their response to Dr. Blackwell's legal pressure, Ryan understood that their rehabilitation program had evolved into something far more significant than helping one patient recover from spinal cord injury. They were potentially challenging medical orthodoxy itself, using Margarita's progress as evidence that patient-centered innovation could achieve results that institution-centered medicine considered impossible. The question was whether one woman's remarkable recovery would be evidence enough to overcome decades of professional authority and institutional resistance to change. The phone call from Patricia Winters came at 11:47 p.m. on Saturday night, just hours before Margarita's planned Sunday dinner demonstration. Ryan answered reluctantly, expecting another piece of bad news in what had already been the most stressful day since his malpractice lawsuit 2 years earlier. "Mr. Martinez, this is Patricia Winters, head of security at Meridian Financial Tower. I know this is late, but I have information that I think you and the Jackson family need to hear immediately."
Ryan sat up in bed, instantly alert. Patricia had been present during my termination from the janitorial position, but her tone now carried an urgency that suggested she was calling in a personal rather than professional capacity. What kind of information, Miss Winters? The kind that explains how Dr. Blackwell has been getting detailed reports about your rehabilitation sessions with Mrs. Jackson. Can you meet me at the building in 20 minutes? Use the service entrance and come alone. Ryan dressed quickly and took a taxi to Meridian Financial Tower, his mind racing through possibilities about what Patricia might have discovered. As a former NYPD detective, she had investigative skills that could uncover surveillance activities that others might miss, but why would she risk her job to help me? Patricia was waiting in the security office, surrounded by multiple monitors displaying camera feeds from throughout the building. She looked tired, but determined, like someone who had spent hours reviewing footage and had finally found what she was looking for. Sit down, Mr. Martinez. What I'm about to show you is going to change everything about your situation with Dr. Blackwell. She pulled up security footage on the main monitor, time-stamped from the previous Tuesday during one of Ryan's rehabilitation sessions with Margarita. The camera angle showed the sitting room where they worked together with clear audio pickup of their conversations about transfer techniques and strength training exercises.
This footage is supposed to be confidential, Patricia explained. Building security cameras in residential areas are strictly for emergency purposes, and access is limited to myself and 2 other senior security personnel. But watch this. She fast-forwarded to the end of the session when Ryan and Margarita had finished their work and he was documenting her progress in his notebook. The timestamp showed 2:47 p.m., but at 3:15 p.m., the camera angle shifted slightly and a figure appeared in the frame who shouldn't have been there. Dr. Sarah Chen, Patricia said, freezing the image. She was supposed to have left the building at 2:30 p.m. after her consultation with Mrs. Jackson, but she stayed behind and positioned herself where she could observe and record your entire session. Ryan stared at the screen, watching Dr. Chen use her smartphone to video record his rehabilitation techniques and document his conversations with Margarita. The violation felt deeply personal, not just professional espionage, but a betrayal of the trust that medical relationships were supposed to embody. There's more, Patricia continued, pulling up additional footage from different dates. This has been going on for 3 weeks. Dr. Chen has been systematically documenting your methods, recording private medical conversations, and gathering evidence for Dr. Blackwell's case against you. The revelation was stunning, not just for its scope, but for its implications about medical ethics and patient privacy. Dr. Chen had been using her legitimate access to Margarita's care to conduct unauthorized surveillance that violated both professional standards and basic human decency. "Why are you showing me this?" Ryan asked. "You could lose your job for revealing confidential security information." Patricia's expression grew serious. "Because I've been in law enforcement for 25 years, and I know the difference between justice and institutional power protection. What Dr. Chen has been doing is illegal surveillance and privacy violation. What you've been doing is helping an old woman get her life back." She pulled out a flash drive and handed it to Ryan. "This contains copies of all the surveillance footage, time-stamped and authenticated. It's evidence that Dr. Blackwell's legal case is based on illegally obtained information, which makes it inadmissible and potentially criminal." Ryan held the flash drive, understanding that Patricia had just provided him with the ammunition to destroy Dr. Blackwell's legal assault and expose the unethical methods that had been used to gather evidence against him. "There's something else you should know," Patricia added. "Dr. Chen has been accessing the building's internal phone system to record calls between Mrs. Jackson and her daughter. That's federal wiretapping, which carries serious criminal penalties." The scope of Dr. Chen's surveillance operation was staggering. She hadn't just been observing rehabilitation sessions, she had been conducting comprehensive intelligence gathering that violated multiple federal laws regarding privacy and electronic surveillance. Ryan's phone buzzed with an urgent text from Victoria. "Emergency situation, need you here immediately. Dr. Chen and Dr. Blackwell are both here demanding to examine Mother." "I have to go," Ryan said to Patricia. "They're at the penthouse now."
"Wait," Patricia said, handing him another envelope. "There's one more thing. I did some background research on Dr. Blackwell's relationship with Dr. Chen. They're not just professional colleagues." Ryan opened the envelope to find copies of financial records showing substantial consulting payments from Dr. Blackwell's private practice to Dr. Chen's medical corporation, dating back over 2 years. The amounts were significant, enough to suggest that Dr. Chen was essentially on Dr. Blackwell's payroll as a source of information about wealthy patients who might be considering alternative treatments. Dr. Blackwell has been paying Dr. Chen to monitor his former patients and report any unconventional treatments that might compete with his conservative approach. This isn't about medical ethics or patient safety. This is about protecting market share and eliminating competition. The revelation reframed everything Ryan had understood about the opposition to his work with Margarita. Dr. Blackwell wasn't motivated by genuine concern about unlicensed practice or patient welfare. He was running a sophisticated business operation designed to maintain his monopoly on high-end rehabilitation services for wealthy patients. Ryan rode the elevator to the penthouse level, armed with evidence that could expose the entire conspiracy, but uncertain about what confrontation awaited him. The flash drive in his pocket contained proof that Dr. Blackwell's legal assault was based on illegally obtained information, while the financial records showed that his motivation was commercial rather than medical. When the elevator doors opened into the penthouse lobby, Ryan could hear raised voices from the sitting room where he and Margarita had spent so many productive hours together. Dr. Blackwell's authoritative tone was unmistakable, but it was being met with equally firm resistance from Victoria. "Mrs. Jackson's current condition is far superior to anything achieved through traditional rehabilitation," Victoria was saying. "Temporary improvements that will inevitably deteriorate when reality reasserts itself," Dr. Blackwell replied dismissively. "Mr. Martinez has created false hope through unsustainable techniques that ignore the permanent nature of spinal cord injury." Ryan entered the sitting room to find Dr. Blackwell standing authoritatively near Margarita's wheelchair, while Dr. Chen hovered nearby with a medical bag and documentation that presumably contained her illegally gathered surveillance reports. "Mr. Martinez," Dr. Blackwell said coldly, "I'm surprised to see you here, given the cease and desist order you received this morning. Your continued presence constitutes violation of a legal directive."
"Actually, Dr. Blackwell," Ryan replied, pulling out the flash drive that Patricia had given him, "I think we need to discuss the methods you've been using to gather information about Mrs. Jackson's medical care." The shift in Ryan's tone caught everyone's attention. Instead of the defensive posture Dr. Blackwell had obviously expected, Ryan was speaking with the confidence of someone who held decisive evidence. "What are you talking about?" Dr. Chen asked nervously, her eyes darting between Ryan and the flash drive he was holding. "I'm talking about illegal surveillance, unauthorized recording of private medical conversations, and commercial espionage designed to eliminate competition for wealthy rehabilitation patients," Ryan said calmly. "Would you like to see the security footage, Dr. Chen? Or should we start with the financial records showing Dr. Blackwell's payments for your surveillance services?" The silence that followed was deafening. Dr. Blackwell's confident demeanor cracked visibly, while Dr. Chen appeared to be calculating whether denial or confession would better serve her interests. Victoria looked back and forth between the doctors and Ryan, beginning to understand that the confrontation she had been dreading was about to become something entirely different. Not a defense of unconventional treatment, but an exposure of medical corruption that reached far beyond her mother's care. The laptop screen illuminated the penthouse sitting room as Ryan connected the flash drive and pulled up the first piece of surveillance footage. Dr. Blackwell's confident posture had shifted to something approaching wariness, while Dr. Chen stood frozen near the windows, apparently calculating her options for damage control. "This is security camera footage from Tuesday, October 15th, Ryan announced, clicking play on the video file. The timestamp shows Dr. Chen remaining in the building 30 minutes after her scheduled consultation ended, positioning herself to secretly record my rehabilitation session with Mrs. Jackson. The footage was crystal clear,
showing Dr. Chen crouched behind a partially open door, using her smartphone to video record Ryan's techniques while documenting his conversations with Margarita in a notebook. Her movements were deliberate and systematic, clearly indicating someone conducting planned surveillance rather than accidentally observing patient care. "This is taken out of context," Dr. Chen said quickly, her voice higher than usual. "I was concerned about Mrs. Jackson's welfare and wanted to ensure she wasn't being subjected to inappropriate treatment." Victoria moved closer to the laptop screen, her expression darkening as she watched her trusted physician conducting covert surveillance in her own home. "Dr. Chen, you were documenting treatment techniques, not monitoring patient safety. This looks like industrial espionage." Ryan advanced to the next video file, showing Dr. Chen's surveillance activities from multiple dates over a 3-week period. Here's October 8th, October 12th, October 18th, and October 22nd, 4 separate occasions when Dr. Chen conducted unauthorized recording of private medical sessions. Dr. Blackwell finally spoke, his tone attempting to regain professional authority despite the damaging evidence. Even if Dr. Chen's methods were overzealous, the fundamental concern remains valid. Mr. Martinez is providing medical treatment without proper licensing, which poses genuine risks to Mrs. Jackson's well-being. "That might be a compelling argument," Ryan replied, "if your concern was actually about medical ethics rather than business competition." He clicked to the financial documents Patricia had provided, displaying bank records showing regular payments from Dr. Blackwell's private practice to Dr. Chen's medical corporation. The amounts were substantial, $15,000 monthly consulting fees that had been ongoing for over 2 years. These are payments Dr. Blackwell has been making to Dr. Chen for surveillance services targeting his former patients who might be considering alternative treatments. This isn't about medical safety, it's about eliminating competition for high-end rehabilitation services. Margarita, who had been listening to the confrontation with growing anger, wheeled her chair closer to Dr. Blackwell with the focused intensity that had made her an effective single mother and supportive business advisor. "Dr. Blackwell," she said, her voice carrying icy precision, "you've been paying my physician to spy on my medical care and violate my privacy for the purpose of protecting your business interests?" "Mrs. Jackson, I can explain." "Please do," Victoria interrupted, her tone carrying the same deadly calm she used in hostile corporate negotiations. "I'm particularly interested in hearing how you justify conducting surveillance in my home and recording private conversations between my mother and her medical providers." Dr. Blackwell's composure finally cracked under the weight of evidence and direct questioning. The payments to Dr. Chen were for legitimate consulting services regarding complex spinal cord injury cases. If she chose to monitor unconventional treatments that might pose risks to patients, that was within her professional discretion. Monitoring that included recording private phone conversations between family members discussing medical decisions, Ryan added, pulling up audio files that Patricia had discovered, which constitutes federal wiretapping and carries criminal penalties of up to 5 years in prison. Dr. Chen's face went pale as she realized the full scope of her legal exposure. "I never intended to violate any laws. I was simply concerned about a vulnerable patient being subjected to experimental treatments." "Vulnerable patient?" Margarita's voice rose with indignation. "Dr. Chen, I'm a 74-year-old woman who spent 18 months accepting medical limitations that turned out to be artificial constraints rather than actual physical realities. Mr. Martinez helped me discover capabilities that you and Dr. Blackwell insisted were impossible." To demonstrate her point, Margarita executed a series of advanced wheelchair maneuvers and upper body movements that would have been impossible for her before Ryan's rehabilitation program. Her strength, coordination, and confidence were obvious to everyone in the room.
"In 1 month of working with Mr. Martinez, I've achieved more functional improvement than I experienced in the previous year of traditional therapy," she continued. "The only reason you're opposing his methods is that they threaten your business model of keeping patients dependent on expensive long-term conventional treatment." Victoria walked to her mother's side, presenting a united front against the medical professionals who had betrayed their trust. Dr. Blackwell, you violated patient privacy, conducted illegal surveillance in my home, and corrupted my mother's physician into criminal activity. I want both of you out of this building immediately. Victoria, you're making a serious mistake, Dr. Blackwell said, attempting to regain control of the situation. Mr. Martinez's unlicensed practice still violates medical regulations, regardless of what methods Dr. Chen and I use to document it. The medical board won't ignore those violations just because you're upset about our investigatory techniques. Ryan stood up, feeling more confident than he had since his original malpractice lawsuit had destroyed his career. Actually, Dr. Blackwell, I think you'll find that illegally obtained evidence is inadmissible in medical board proceedings, just like it is in criminal court. Your entire case against me is based on surveillance activities that violated federal privacy laws. He pulled out his phone and showed them a text message from Victoria's legal team that had arrived during the confrontation. Patterson, Crenshaw, and Associates have already filed complaints with the medical board regarding Dr. Chen's surveillance activities and with the FBI regarding the wiretapping violations. They have also submitted all evidence of your commercial conspiracy to eliminate competition in the rehabilitation market. The power dynamic in the room had completely reversed. Dr. Blackwell and Dr. Chen, who had arrived expecting to force Ryan's termination and Margarita's return to conventional treatment, now faced criminal charges, professional sanctions, and public exposure of their unethical business practices. Furthermore, Victoria added, I'm terminating all business relationships with both of your practices, and I'll be recommending that my board of directors and business associates reconsider any medical services they may be receiving from providers who engage in patient surveillance and privacy violations. Dr. Chen made one final attempt to salvage her position. Mrs. Jackson, surely you understand that we were motivated by genuine concern for your welfare. Dr. Blackwell and I have decades of experience treating spinal cord injuries, and we were worried that unconventional methods might cause setbacks in your recovery. Margarita's response was immediate and devastating. Dr. Chen, the only setback in my recovery was spending 18 months accepting your medical opinion that significant improvement was impossible. Mr. Martinez proved that assessment wrong in 30 days. She gestured toward Ryan with obvious respect and gratitude. This man took the time to understand my individual situation, developed techniques specifically for my needs, and helped me reclaim capabilities that you insisted were gone forever. The contrast between your patient-centered approach and your institutional constraints couldn't be clearer. Dr. Blackwell and Dr. Chen exchanged glances, apparently recognizing that their position was untenable. The evidence against them was comprehensive, their legal exposure was serious, and their attempt to discredit Ryan had backfired spectacularly. This isn't over, Dr. Blackwell said as he gathered his materials. The medical establishment won't ignore unlicensed practice just because you've achieved temporary improvements. You're right that this isn't over, Ryan replied calmly, but not in the way you think. Mrs. Jackson's progress is going to be documented and published as evidence that innovative rehabilitation can achieve results that conservative medicine considers impossible. Other patients deserve to know that your limitations aren't their limitations. As the two doctors left the penthouse, their departure marked more than just the end of a confrontation. They were witnessing the collapse of a medical conspiracy designed to suppress innovation and maintain artificial market control over rehabilitation services for wealthy patients. Victoria closed the laptop containing the surveillance evidence and looked at Ryan with an expression that mixed gratitude with newfound respect for his courage under pressure. Mr. Martinez, she said formally, I believe we have a dinner to prepare. Mother has been looking forward to surprising me with her cooking abilities, and after everything that happened today, I think we all deserve to celebrate. Margarita smiled with genuine joy for the first time since the confrontation had begun. Ryan, I hope you're ready to see what 2 months of strength training can accomplish in the kitchen. We're going to cook a meal that proves recovery isn't just about accepting limitations, it's about discovering new possibilities. The Sunday dinner preparation began at 3 p.m. sharp, transforming Margarita's penthouse kitchen into a stage where months of rehabilitation work would be demonstrated through the simple act of cooking for her daughter. Ryan positioned himself nearby as a spotter and safety observer, but quickly realized that his role had shifted from therapist to witness as Margarita moved through the kitchen with confidence and competence that would have been unimaginable during their first elevator encounter. The key to cooking from a wheelchair, Margarita explained to Victoria, who was watching her mother's movements with barely concealed amazement, is understanding that accessibility isn't about limitation, it's about adaptation. Mr. Martinez taught me that the same principles applied to mobility that apply to cooking. You work with what you have and find creative ways to accomplish what you need. She demonstrated the transfer techniques Ryan had taught her, moving smoothly from her wheelchair to a specially positioned stool that allowed her to work at the stove while maintaining stability and safety. Her upper body strength, developed through weeks of progressive resistance training, enabled her to lift pots and manipulate cooking implements with ease that surprised even Ryan. "I can't believe how fluid your movements are," Victoria said, her voice carrying emotion that went beyond simple observation of cooking techniques. "6 weeks ago, you needed assistance with basic daily activities. Now you're preparing a complete meal independently."
Not independently, Margarita corrected, glancing toward Ryan with gratitude. Mr. Martinez gave me the tools to rediscover what my body was still capable of achieving. But the work, the daily exercises, the gradual building of strength and confidence, that was a collaboration between us. As they worked together to prepare what had once been Margarita's signature dish, braised short ribs with root vegetables and homemade pasta, Ryan found himself documenting not just her physical capabilities, but the transformation in her entire approach to challenges. The woman who had spent 18 months convinced that her life was essentially over was now problem-solving, adapting, and creating with the same determination that had enabled her to raise Victoria as a single mother. The phone call from Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, Margarita's neurologist, came just as they were seasoning the braising liquid. Victoria answered on speakerphone, allowing everyone to hear the conversation that would officially validate Ryan's rehabilitation program. "Victoria, I've completed my review of your mother's progress over the past 6 weeks," Dr. Hartwell said, her tone carrying professional excitement that was unusual for medical consultations. "The improvements in her strength, mobility, and functional capabilities are remarkable by any standard, but particularly impressive for someone with her type of spinal cord injury." Margarita paused in her cooking to listen more carefully to the medical assessment that could determine whether Ryan's innovative approaches would be recognized by the broader medical community. "I've compared her current functional assessments to her baseline measurements from immediately after her accident," Dr. Hartwell continued. "Her upper body strength has improved by 340%. Her transfer capabilities have advanced from requiring maximum assistance to complete independence, and her cardiovascular endurance has increased to levels typical of women 20 years younger." Ryan felt a surge of professional validation that went beyond personal satisfaction. Dr. Hartwell's measurements provided objective evidence that his rehabilitation techniques could achieve results that traditional medical practice considered impossible for patients with complete spinal cord injuries. More importantly, Dr. Hartwell added, Mrs. Jackson's psychological assessments showed dramatic improvements in mood, motivation, and overall quality of life indicators. The depression and hopelessness that characterized her first year after the accident have been replaced by engagement and optimism that are directly correlated with her physical progress. Victoria looked at her mother, who was continuing to cook while listening to the medical validation of her recovery journey. "Dr. Hartwell, what does this mean for mother's long-term prognosis?" "It means that Mr. Martinez's rehabilitation program has achieved outcomes that exceed anything I've seen in 25 years of treating spinal cord injuries," Dr. Hartwell replied frankly. "Your mother's case should be documented and published as evidence that innovative rehabilitation approaches can produce results far beyond what conventional therapy typically delivers." The conversation was interrupted by a call on Victoria's business line. She glanced at the caller ID and smiled with satisfaction. "That's Janet Morrison from Patterson, Crenshaw & Associates. She's probably calling with an update about Dr. Blackwell and Dr. Chen's legal situation."
Victoria took the call privately while Margarita and Ryan continued working on dinner preparations. When she returned 15 minutes later, her expression carried the same satisfaction Ryan had seen when she completed successful business negotiations. Dr. Blackwell and Dr. Chen have both agreed to surrender their medical licenses pending investigation of the surveillance and wiretapping charges. The FBI is treating their activities as a criminal conspiracy to violate patient privacy rights, and the medical board is conducting a comprehensive review of their business practices with other patients. Ryan felt a complex mixture of relief and sadness. Justice was being served, but the destruction of two medical careers, even careers built on unethical practices, represented a significant loss for the healthcare system. There's more, Victoria continued. The New York State Medical Board has expedited the review of your license reinstatement, Mr. Martinez. Given the evidence of fraud in your original malpractice case and the documented success of your rehabilitation program with Mother, they expect to restore your full practicing privileges within 30 days. The news hit Ryan with an emotional impact that surprised him. For 2 years, he had accepted that his career as a physical therapist was permanently over, that his knowledge and skills would never again be officially recognized or professionally utilized. Now, not only was his license being restored, but his innovative techniques were being validated as superior to conventional approaches. Additionally, Victoria said, I've been contacted by 3 major medical centers that want to discuss implementing your rehabilitation protocols in their spinal cord injury programs. The publicity from Dr. Blackwell's criminal charges has created significant interest in alternative approaches to traditional therapy. As the afternoon progressed and the dinner neared completion, Ryan realized that their collaboration had achieved far more than Margarita's individual recovery. They had successfully challenged medical orthodoxy, exposed corruption in healthcare business practices, and demonstrated that patient-centered innovation could produce results that institutional medicine considered impossible. The braised short ribs emerged from the oven perfectly tender. The homemade pasta was cooked to ideal consistency, and the root vegetables had been prepared with the precision that reflected Margarita's attention to detail and Ryan's safety protocols. But more than a successful meal, the dinner represented proof that recovery could extend far beyond medical expectations when patients are empowered to push against artificial limitations. Before we eat, Margarita said, positioning herself at the head of the dining table with the grace and confidence of someone who had reclaimed her role as family matriarch, I want to say something to both of you. She looked first at Victoria, then at Ryan, her expression carrying the same strength and determination that had enabled her to survive devastating injury and rebuild her sense of purpose.
6 weeks ago, I was convinced that my life was essentially over, that I would spend whatever years remained as an increasing burden on my daughter while contributing nothing meaningful to anyone's well-being. Today, I prepared this meal independently. I'm stronger and more capable than I've been since my accident, and I'm looking forward to tomorrow instead of simply enduring it. Her voice grew stronger as she continued. Mr. Martinez, you didn't just restore my physical capabilities, you gave me back my identity as someone who can solve problems, overcome challenges, and contribute to the people I love. That's not medical treatment, that's a form of resurrection. Victoria reached across the table to take her mother's hand, her eyes bright with tears that reflected both gratitude and pride. Mother, watching you reclaim your strength and independence has been the most inspiring thing I've ever witnessed. And Mr. Martinez, you've given our family something that money couldn't buy, hope that seemed permanently lost. As they shared the meal that Margarita had prepared through her own effort and determination, Ryan understood that their collaboration had created something that would extend far beyond their individual relationships. They had proven that innovative rehabilitation could achieve remarkable results, that patient autonomy should be respected over institutional authority, and that recovery was limited more by medical assumptions than by actual physical realities. The question now was how to use their success to help other patients who had been told to accept limitations that might be as artificial as the ones Margarita had overcome. 6 months later,
The Jackson Rehabilitation Institute opened its doors in a renovated medical facility on Manhattan's Upper East Side, featuring state-of-the-art equipment and innovative therapy protocols that challenged every assumption about what was possible for patients with severe disabilities. Ryan stood in the bright, spacious main therapy room, watching 12 patients work with adaptive techniques that had been refined and systematized based on his success with Margarita. The institute represented far more than a business venture. It was proof that one woman's remarkable recovery could be transformed into a comprehensive program capable of helping hundreds of patients achieve improvements that conventional medicine had deemed impossible. Each piece of equipment, every training protocol, and all of the facility's design elements reflected lessons learned during those crucial weeks when Margarita had rediscovered her body's potential. "The morning session results are remarkable," reported Dr. Michael Torres, the Institute's medical director, who had been recruited from Johns Hopkins specifically because of his willingness to challenge traditional rehabilitation limitations. Patient strength improvements are averaging 280% above baseline, and independence in activities of daily living has increased by an average of 400% across all injury types. Ryan reviewed the progress charts displayed on the wall-mounted monitors, each representing an individual whose life had been transformed through techniques that originated in a broken elevator and 43 minutes of compassionate conversation. The numbers were impressive, but what moved him most were the personal stories. Patients who had regained hope, families who had been reunited with loved ones they thought were permanently lost, and medical professionals who were discovering that recovery could extend far beyond anything they had been taught in medical school. Margarita entered the therapy room using her racing wheelchair, a piece of equipment that would have been unimaginable during her months of depression and acceptance of limitation. At 75, she had become not just a patient success story, but an active advocate for innovative rehabilitation approaches, speaking at medical conferences and consulting with other facilities interested in implementing patient-centered therapy protocols. "The 2 p.m. documentary crew is here," she announced to Ryan with the efficiency that had made her an effective business advisor to Victoria. "Channel 7 wants to interview patients about their progress, and the producer is particularly interested in filming transfer techniques and adaptive cooking demonstrations." The media attention had been overwhelming since the story of Dr. Blackwell's surveillance conspiracy had become public 6 months earlier. Ryan's rehabilitation methods had been featured in medical journals, disability advocacy publications, and mainstream news programs that portrayed his work as evidence that the healthcare system often imposes artificial limitations on patient recovery. "How do you feel about being called a revolutionary?" asked Sarah Mitchell, the documentary producer, as she set up cameras to film the afternoon therapy session. "Critics say your methods give false hope to patients with permanent disabilities." Ryan considered the question while watching a 42-year-old construction worker named David practice advanced wheelchair transfers that would allow him to return to modified work duties. 6 months ago, David had been told that his T10 spinal cord injury would confine him to basic wheelchair mobility for life. Today, he was demonstrating strength and agility that exceeded many non-disabled individuals. "I think the concept of false hope is sometimes used to justify giving up on patients prematurely," Ryan replied. "What we've discovered is that the human body's capacity for adaptation and compensation is far greater than traditional medicine typically explores. We're not promising miraculous cures, we're proving that current limitations often reflect our therapeutic approach rather than actual physical realities." Victoria arrived for the afternoon advisory board meeting, carrying documents that would formalize the Institute's expansion to 3 additional cities over the next 18 months. Her financial empire had provided the resources to transform Ryan's innovative techniques into a scalable program, but more importantly, her business expertise had created sustainable funding models that would make advanced rehabilitation accessible to patients regardless of their economic circumstances.
The insurance companies are finally beginning to recognize that our intensive rehabilitation programs produce better long-term outcomes at lower total costs than traditional maintenance therapy, she reported to the assembled medical staff and board members. Blue Cross has approved coverage for our 12-week intensive protocols, and Medicare is conducting a pilot study that could lead to nationwide coverage.
The insurance approval represented a crucial victory in their effort to democratize access to innovative rehabilitation. During Ryan's early months of working with Margarita, he had worried that his techniques would only benefit wealthy patients who could afford private care. Now, through Victoria's strategic planning and comprehensive documentation of patient outcomes, they were creating a system that could serve anyone who needed advanced rehabilitation services. Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell joined the meeting via video conference from her new position as Director of Spinal Cord Research at the National Institutes of Health, where she was leading a comprehensive study of innovative rehabilitation approaches based on the Institute's protocols. "The preliminary results from our multi-site study are extraordinary," Dr. Hartwell reported. "Patients receiving Jackson Institute protocols are achieving functional improvements that exceed traditional therapy outcomes by an average of 350%. More importantly, psychological assessments show dramatic improvements in quality of life indicators that persist long-term." The research validation was personally satisfying for Ryan, but what mattered most was the transformation he witnessed daily in patients who arrived at the Institute convinced that their lives were essentially over. Like Margarita 18 months earlier, they came believing that acceptance of limitation was their only option, but left understanding that recovery could extend far beyond medical expectations when they were empowered to challenge artificial constraints. Carmen entered the therapy room carrying her 6-month-old daughter, Elena, whose middle name honored the single mother who had worked 3 jobs to give her daughter opportunities for success. Carmen's cancer treatment had been completed successfully, and her medical bills were now manageable thanks to Ryan's transformation from janitor to internationally recognized rehabilitation specialist. "Your patients want to know if you're available for the 4 p.m. cooking demonstration," Carmen said, settling into a chair where she could observe the afternoon therapy sessions. "Margarita has been teaching them advanced kitchen techniques, and they're excited to show family members what they've learned." The cooking program had become one of the Institute's most popular offerings, allowing patients to reclaim domestic capabilities that connected them to family relationships and independent living. Watching people prepare meals for loved ones provided emotional validation that went far beyond clinical measures of strength and mobility improvement. As the afternoon session concluded, Ryan found himself reflecting on the journey that had begun with a simple act of kindness during an elevator malfunction. He had believed he was helping a stranger navigate a temporary inconvenience, but that 43-minute encounter had ultimately transformed not just 2 lives, but an entire approach to understanding what was possible for people with severe disabilities. The Institute's walls were lined with photographs showing patients at various stages of their recovery, struggling with basic movements during their first weeks, mastering complex skills during intensive training, and ultimately achieving independence that had seemed impossible when they arrived. Each image represented proof that human potential often exceeded medical assumptions when patients were given appropriate tools and support. Margarita approached him as the facility prepared to close for the evening, her movement fluid and confident in ways that would have seemed miraculous during their first meeting. "Ryan, Victoria and I have been discussing our next project. We want to establish a research foundation that will fund innovative rehabilitation studies at universities across the country." "What kind of research?" Ryan asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. "Studies that challenge conventional limitations on what disabled patients can achieve," Margarita replied, with the same determination that had enabled her recovery. "Research that puts patient potential ahead of institutional caution, that explores adaptive possibilities rather than focusing on permanent deficits." As they prepared to leave the Institute, Ryan understood that their work had evolved far beyond individual patient care. They had created a movement that challenged medical orthodoxy, proved that innovative approaches could achieve remarkable results, and demonstrated that recovery was limited more by therapeutic assumptions than by actual physical realities. Outside the Institute's windows, New York City continued its relentless pace of ambition and struggle. But inside this carefully designed facility, patients were discovering daily that their limitations were often less permanent than they had been told, that their potential was greater than medical tradition typically acknowledged, and that recovery could extend far beyond anything they had dared to imagine. The woman who had given up hope and the man who had lost his career had not only found redemption together, they had created a legacy that would continue transforming lives long after their individual stories had become part of medical history.
Sometimes the most profound changes begin with the smallest acts of human kindness, but their impact can ultimately reshape entire systems when courage meets compassion and innovation challenges convention. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.